Good evening, colleagues. Welcome to this meeting of the Derbyshire Dales Local Plan Committee held here in Matlock Town Hall on Wednesday 17th September 2025. Just some housekeeping rules first, because we have members of the public with us. We've no fire alarms planned for this evening, so if you do hear the alarm, please make your way out of the building through either of the emergency exits as quickly as possible. Just to introduce those on the table here, I'm Councillor Peter O'Brien. I'm Chair of the Local Plan Committee. To my left we have Kay France, who heads up our legal team, John Ramsey from our committee secretariat. On my right we have the Vice Chair of the committee, Councillor David Hughes, and to his right Mike Hayes, who is our Planning Policy Manager, and Nikki Bartley, who is a member of, what's your title, Nikki? Is a member of the Planning Policy Team. Senior Planning Officer in the Planning Policy Team. Right, we've got a number of important items on the agenda this evening for discussion and debate, but before we get to those, we've got our normal introductory items. First of all, apologies for absence, please, John.
Chair, we've had apologies for absence from Councillor Dermot Murphy.
Thank you. Those are noted. Item 2 is our previous meeting, which was on the 16th of July 2025, and I think those have been made available to everyone. Would someone like to move approval? Councillor Burfoot, anyone prepared to second? Councillor Chapman? All those like to show approval of that, please?
I'm abstaining.
Abstentions? So that's approved with 2 abstentions to note. Item 3 is our public participation, and we're pleased to welcome one member of the public here this evening, Vicky Rains from Tansley Parish Council, who's come to address us. If you'd like to make your way up, Vicky, to the front here. And when you're nicely settled, you've got 2 minutes to make your points to the committee. Did I say 2 minutes? I meant 3 minutes. Apologies.
Yes, good evening. Your evidence base for Infrastructure 2021 online is out of date. Much of its content, not implemented. It states there will be highway challenges in Matlock, which will require schemes to improve capacity in order to accommodate future development, a need to divert development away from combined sewers where there is a known capacity issue, and key challenges with water demand being greater than supply, according to Severn Trent. All known facts for several years, but no action taken and no updated assessments apparent on your website. We've been asking for months for cumulative assessments to be done of our area. However, this is not thought important, and Derbyshire Dales just ploughed on identifying sites, not knowing if infrastructure could support the proposals. It would appear the Planning Advisory Service also have concerns related to the evidence base or lack of it. They say it is unclear if a full and compliant check has been undertaken of existing evidence base against MPPF and PPG. Robust evidence is essential to reduce the potential challenge and delay of an independent examination. They go on to say, in parallel with the evidence-based audit, the Council should consider whether it needs to review the strategy formulation process, particularly site selection, to ensure all constraints that may affect site suitability have been robustly identified. There are many more concerns raised by them. So where are the updated assessments? Without the required infrastructure in place, how can you identify potential sites? In particular, Tansley, which experienced frequent spills into the Bentley Brook, Evidently, our combined sewers are at capacity. Severn Trent regularly bring in tankers containing 15,000 litres of drinking water to our feeder tanks. This happens throughout the year, not just at times of drought. It would appear many concerns by Planning Advisory Service relate to our community. We know consultants have been commissioned to do an assessment of playing fields. For interest, the 21 assessment found this area was adequate. One wonders why money is being spent on this assessment when there is a known problem with foul drainage and fresh water. Some might argue vital infrastructure by comparison. So where are the assessments related to the foul water and fresh water and highways? Because there is a problem in Tansley which does not appear to have been addressed. You have information telling you that the Bentley Brook catchment is highly sensitive. Tansley is in this catchment. Why do you continue to ignore this information? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Rains. You raised a number of pertinent points there. I'll simply comment that I'm of the firm belief that all the points you raise are taken into consideration rigorously by our officers, and the council does certainly not plough on regardless. But thank you for the points you raised. Item 4 on the agenda is interests. Do any members have any interests related to what's on the agenda they'd like to declare? No, that's taken as read then. Item 5, any questions? I think, John, we don't have any questions this evening. No? Right, we'll move on to the substantive part of the agenda that's item 6. And Mike Case, our Planning Policy Manager, is going to give us an update on progress with the local plan and on where we are with discussions with the National Park Authority on housing numbers, which we know is something which exercises this committee greatly. And following Mike's update, Councillor Hughes is also going to give a brief update on a recent meeting which I and a number of officers had with the East Midlands Combined Authority. I think members may find interesting. So Mike has a presentation on the screen there, so I'll hand over to him.
Thank you, Chair. Well, good evening, members. Good evening, members of the public. We thought we'd take this opportunity to provide you with an update of where we are with the local plan and the different aspects of the work streams that we are engaged with at the moment. You remember at the previous meeting of this committee in July, we set out a work programme we presented on the screen, quite a sort of a long and lengthy list of projects and pieces of evidence base which we were working on, so we thought it would be worthwhile 2 months on to give you a bit of an update as to where we were on those. It's going to be a very brief overview of where we are with them, because most of the information that we are collating and working on at the moment will be brought back to this committee at some point in the future. So in terms of the settlement hierarchy update, this is where we're looking at the extent to which there are elements of sustainable development are being delivered and achieved within the different settlements, and whether or not they are different in their ranking from those ones that we've previously adopted. The information that we have gathered from various different sources, including town and parish councils, are now being collated together and assessed to determine whether or not there's any changes necessary to be made to the settlement hierarchy and the way in which the different settlements sit within the different tiers. As we've said on the screen there, that's going to be brought back to the local plan committee in October. The second item that we've been working on with consultants is on a design code for Derbyshire Dales, and members were invited, and a number of members did attend an officer training session, member officer training session back in July, which basically gave a bit of an outline of the structure and the format and content of what was going to go into the design code. That final draft is now with us and is now just being sort of batted back and forth between ourselves and the consultant to get final sign-off. And again, we intend to bring that back to this committee meeting in October. Probably the most substantive piece of work that we have ongoing at the moment is a piece of work which Arcadis Consultancy are working on for us. And this is looking at a raft of different but interrelated issues. So the first part of it is to look at what development options might be available to us, and looking and building on, in some respects, on the fourth item on the screen there, our strategic housing land availability work. What we've asked them to do is to look at, in particular, the extent to which there may be opportunities to extend existing sites or potential sites to provide us with the opportunity to fully meet our potential future housing requirements. As part of that work, and to make sure that we are addressing what impacts new development might have, not just on terms of potentially new allocated sites, but also as part of that work we're looking at on new settlements, making sure that the right traffic and transportation infrastructure is in place. So looking at the impacts of vehicular movements on the highways network and looking whether or not that takes it to a position where we need to mitigate that by looking at additional infrastructure in the form of public transport and the like. The third phase of work, the third element of the work that Arcadis are doing for us is in relation to a more detailed level 2 strategic flood risk assessment. So we've already had a strategic flood risk assessment undertaken, and that's very much a high level view of the risks associated with flood risk from all different sources, I hasten to add. And this is much more drilling down into much more local areas and much more around about the impact that flood risk might have on and be a consequence of development sites and development approach to looking at flood risk, and that work that's been done on flood risk will feed into the detailed allocations for individual sites. So, you know, we are looking at those in a much more sort of thorough way compared to the way in which we approached things previously. And that, again, town and parish council has been asked to comment upon. That will look at the individual sites and potential sites that are out there. The evaluation process is ongoing at the moment. I think I mentioned it last time, we have had maybe some issues with one or two of the stakeholders being a little bit tardy in responding back to us, but we are working through those as we speak. And those pieces of work we're hoping and anticipating will bring back to this committee in November or December of this year. One of the areas of work that we need to make sure we address properly is the extent to which the changes in population that might be brought about by our housing changes and our housing review work has an impact upon what our employment land needs will be going forward, and also what that might mean in terms of our impact on town and local centres. So we've got some work being done by Senior Projects for us on employment land and retailing and capacity work. That work's ongoing, and to a certain extent that work is reliant upon the outcomes from the SLAR work and the development options, so that actually once we get an idea of what the scale of development is, they can then plug that into their model and then provide us with the sort of answers, if you like, as to what they anticipate the future employment land requirements might be, and consequently what the impact might be on terms of retail capacity. The next item we've got on there is a piece of work which we've recently commissioned from KKP to look at public open space. It's important for us to make sure that as part of the local plan we are not only delivering the housing, the employment land, but we're also making sure that the right amount of public open space, be that more formal space, be that informal space, is delivered. You know, that's a critical part of our infrastructure. This is a bit of a longer term piece of work. As you see there, we anticipate the final report isn't due until mid next year. And the reason that isn't going to be complete until mid next year is because the consultants need to be able to sort of do a full year cycle and looking at the quality and the quantity of the particular sports and recreation facilities that we've got available to us across the district. So they look at what the difference is between a winter use and a summer use. But we will get that back by the middle of next year, and that will feed into the Regulation 19 plan, which is the plan which we'll have prepared and ready to go for submission to the Secretary of State. Members will also be aware that, and they've made it very clear to us through the preparation work we've been doing with yourselves on the local plan, that they want us to look at how far we can push in terms of biodiversity net gain, and whether or not actually there is a justification for going beyond the 10% statutory requirement. We are just about to commission some consultants to look at that particular piece of work, and we hope that will be completed sometime in early next year. And again, that will feed into the policy approaches that we put forward to members for the Regulation 19 stage, the submission stage. The sustainability appraisal is an important part of the work that we're undertaking. It's going to be important for us to take this into account in coming to decisions, particularly around the selections of sites. The sustainability appraisal looks at the social, economic and environmental impacts of not only the proposals and the sites that we bring forward, but also the way in which the policies are worded and within the plan. The scoping report, the initial piece of work that's done to sort of identify the nature of the areas that need to be looked at has been done. We've done the consultation work with the statutory consultees, and now the remainder of the essay will continue alongside and in parallel with the work we do on the wording of policies and the site selection process. Finally, the piece of work we're looking at in terms of infrastructure and viability. Mrs. Rains has already mentioned the fact that there is a piece of work on our website. That piece of work was essentially a baseline piece of work which set out essentially where the District Council was in relation to infrastructure and the potential impacts the impacts that development might have on infrastructure at different levels and different scales. That was essentially a piece of baseline work. The more detailed work will come forward through the work which is likely to start in the very near future. The infrastructure piece of work does, as with other pieces of work, dovetail in with the work we're doing on our development options and our housing sites, because what we need to make sure is that as we develop in our thoughts on where the sites might be and the scale of those developments, we're actually making sure that we're delivering the right level of infrastructure, and that's across the board. That's not just about surface water, foul sewage, it's about doctors' facilities, about education facilities. All of those are a critical part of delivering sustainable communities. So we need to make sure we've got a really good handle on what the infrastructure needs will be going forward and how they're likely to be delivered. The viability part of that piece of work is another important part of what we need to do, and that's looking at the extent to which the policies we have within the plan impact upon their deliverability and the deliverability of the plan as a whole. So, for example, if we load up the requirements for affordable housing at a rate which is above what the development industry can afford to deliver, then that means that actually the infrastructure and also the requirements we've got in the plan are likely to not be deliverable. So we've got to make sure that we can assess that in a very logistical way. What we need to make sure is, and it's enshrined within the NPPF, is that the plan is deliverable. And I think I've said that to you on numerous occasions in the past. And we test that by doing a whole plan viability piece of work. Those pieces of work go hand in hand together, because obviously the costs of infrastructure have an impact upon the development costs for individual sites and locations. That work will dovetail with the work we're doing on the housing development options and also on the strategic housing land availability assessment work. Final slide I've got here for you is just an update on where we are with the work we're doing with the National Park on housing numbers. As you'll be aware, there's a joint member officer working group which meets on a fairly regular basis with the National Park members. Councillor Chapman serves on that group from there, and Councillor Hughes does as well from here. The National Park, we understand it, are due to go out for public consultation on our preferred options version of the local plan somewhere around November time. At an officer level, we have been having discussions outside of the working group, and since the last meeting of the working group, and it would appear that they have accepted the evidence we've presented to them about the overall requirement in terms of the split using the standard methodology that the government have advocated for the bit between the split between Derbyshire Dales as a planning authority and the National Park, and their view is that potentially the way in which we've calculated and the figure that we've suggested to them of 158 per annum is a correct calculation for their part of Derbyshire Dales. That's not to say that they will accept that as a final figure, and that's something that will emerge as part of the work they do on their preferred options local plan. The National Park have commissioned some consultants to look at capacity within their settlements and to determine the extent to which they can accommodate future growth within the National Park, taking account of National Park policy. And I think that at this moment in time, my anticipation is that what is likely to come out from the National Park is a figure that's somewhere in the region of about 50 per annum. That compares to what we have in the local plan at the moment of 20 per annum. So we're getting an increase over and above what we've got, but potentially not getting to a level where we think it might be required to meet our future needs according to the standard method. And that is my very brief canter through where we are. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mike. That was very helpful. We'll come on to questions in a moment, because I'm sure there will be questions, and I think Mike's presented what I suggest is a very robust set of methodology there, which I hope gives you confidence as to how the local plan is progressing. David Hughes and officers met with the CCA a couple of weeks ago, and David's going to give a brief resume of the main points that came out of that discussion.
Okay, thank you, Peter. MCO is, of course, responsible for regional economic development, regional spatial strategies, putting forward a case for regional infrastructure and a variety of other things as well. And so at a regional level, it's doing a lot of what we're doing in terms of a local plan at a district level. And of course, that means that there is a significant overlap between what we do and what they do. And we know from some of the outputs from MCA that their understanding of Derbyshire Dales has been relatively limited, and their focus has tended to be elsewhere. And given the change in housing targets that we have and the implications for our spatial strategy arising from that, we felt that it was important that we had a meeting with them to brief them about what our thinking in terms of spatial strategies was concerned for Derbyshire Dales, and to help bring about an alignment between spatial strategies at a regional level and spatial strategy at a local level. So, and this was readily accepted by the MCA people. People we met were the director for Place. Sorry, I lost my screen here. Director of Place Edward Highfield, and the EMCA Housing Programme lead Barry Cunnings. So we were meeting the right place, and EMCA has really just started the development of its spatial strategy. And so we put forward the spatial strategies and our initial thinking, our current thinking about spatial strategies to them. And it was apparent from their reaction that they were to our housing numbers and proposals for a new settlement that they hadn't, in the south of the district, they hadn't appreciated the scale of development consequential of the government housing policy that was required within Derbyshire Dales. So we discussed that and the implications for infrastructure that the new housing targets created, and we also discussed the support that EMCA could provide. They give us some quite interesting insight into the sorts of their thinking and government's thinking about about new settlements. They reported that government was thinking of new settlements of the region of 10,000 dwellings as being sustainable. We said that was probably bigger than we were thinking in Derbyshire Dales. We were far smaller than that, and we pointed out that some of their developments that they were already supporting were in the region of 4,000 or 5,000 houses, and that was more in line perhaps with what we would need to do if we developed a new settlement in Derbyshire Dales. And we'd taken advice, and they agreed that would be sufficient to support a new secondary school and so on. So it would provide the basis for infrastructure. But of course, such settlements require highways, transport, variety of schools, all the sorts of things that Mike has been talking about, and those would be there's a regional component to those and a local component to those, and they have to be fitted together. So we talked around all those issues. We also asked about the process for developing a new settlement, and where the support would come from, and they highlighted that Homes England could provide initial support. There was issues about capital support in terms of capital funding and revenue funding for the development of a new settlement, but those are, I think, things for later meetings. So generally it was a positive meeting, one where they understood where we were coming from and were able to provide us with some helpful advice, and one where when we agreed to meet again when we had more detailed proposals for what we wanted to do, and that we could discuss with them. So we're also aware that any such new settlement was likely to start to be developed once the new unitary authority was in position, and that creates another level of discussion with EMCA about that relationship as well. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Right, questions from colleagues in either to my case or David. Councillor Chapman, David.
Thanks, Peter. Mike, the assessment on your last slide of the housing, the DPA from the Peak Park of 50 would seem a bit premature, as they are currently in the process of having consultants to investigate what that number will be within Peak District settlements. So is that likely to change either way?
It may do, depending upon what the consultants provide in terms of their response.
So could I ask what the 50 was based on? Was it
based upon the discussions I've had with officers?
I think what I would add to that, David, is that it's certainly the view of the Vice Chair and myself that this council will be arguing that the National Park agrees a figure as rather nearer the 158 than the 20, which were the two figures that Mike gave to us, the 20 which is in the current plan and the 158 which emerges from the the new methodology. We don't expect to get up to 158. We want to get as near to that as we can. And so that will be the gist of the, and I hope, David, you'll support that. That will be the gist of the proposition going forward to future meetings of that joint group. I think I'll also say that it's certainly David and myself's view that we will not be looking for the rest of the district to accommodate the difference between whatever figure is agreed with the National Park Authority and that 158. But that we will need the support of officers and the advice of officers on that, and that proposition will obviously come back to this committee in the near future. Lucy.
Thank you for the update on your talks with MCA. I'm just interested, given that we've already done the call for sites without naming somewhere for a new settlement, how feasible is it that we would actually be able to include a new settlement in this local plan?
Shall I take this first one, Mike? Perhaps you might like to add some comments. I think the position that we're in is we've got to put in a plan by a complete plan and have it approved by the end of 2027. And the planning associated with a new settlement will take much longer than that. So the proposal is that we will have sites in the plan for a period, hopefully a 5-year period, so we can meet our 5-year housing supply. And the proposal would be then to have a process for building a new settlement in the local plan, and for that process has to be sufficiently detailed and thorough for the planning inspector to accept it as a means of delivering the substantial number of additional houses that we would need. But we're talking about 8 years perhaps to get a new settlement off the ground. So it is a long process, and it's not one that would need to be undertaken over probably over an additional revision of a local plan. So we can start it off, but we certainly won't finish it within the timescales of this council.
If I can add to that, Councillor Hughes, I think, Councillor Peacock, there's 2 bits to this. The first bit is in terms of what goes into the plan itself, and the second bit, which is what Councillor Hughes is referring to, is much more around the delivery of whatever goes into the plan. At the moment, what we're doing is trying to look at and prepare the evidence to suggest what level of development and what capacity there is within the planning authority area to meet those housing needs that have been identified to us. And we're not in that position yet to be able to say to you as members how close we are to getting that, or how close we are or far away from it we are. That work is still ongoing, and as we say in that update that I've just presented, we will bring that forward to you later in the year. What that will say, I don't know at this moment in time, but we will give you appropriate recommendations at that time. Whether or not that includes the potential for a new settlement, or whether it excludes a new settlement as a part of the options, I can't say at this moment in time. But whatever we do, there will be a requirement for us to understand how the sites that we allocate within the plan are likely to be delivered and when they're likely to be delivered. So that's an important part of it. And we need to have those engaged with the landowners, the developers and agents to get a good feel for that, so that we can understand whether we can achieve a 5-year supply, and then how we then deliver the rest of that requirement and the rest of that capacity between now and the end of the plan period.
Councillor Shelley, Roger.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, very interesting update there, which wasn't actually included in our papers, and I'm just hoping that it will be circulated to members afterwards, if that's okay. Thank you. I mean, I learnt a lot from that. My question really is just on the MCA point. Did you get a sense from them about how far they understand the absolute imperative to make sure that they step up to the mark in terms of delivering that kind of infrastructure and investment in that before developers are faced with building large housing estates?
I think they're in some respects in the same position as us. I mean, the people who build infrastructure are not the people, are not local authorities or regional authorities. It's independent bodies in Severn Trent, electricity companies, Highways Authority. They all have that. They are the regional development organisation will be, the MCA would be an influencer on that, but it has to influence, just as Andy Burnham in Manchester has had to do a lot of work to influence government on transport and rail lines in the Manchester area. I think that's the position that the MCA would be in Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire. It's not they are not in a position to. They are not yet in a position to authorise infrastructure. They can only recommend. So, and we're in that position as well. We don't have we cannot be. We are not responsible for the provision of infrastructure. All we can do is put in place some building blocks that will enable infrastructure to be provided, but nothing more than that. So in this case, it's demand. That's what we're suggesting in terms of our local plan. But we don't have much influence over Severn Trent, for example, in where they put their infrastructure.
Okay, if I could just come back. So is it not the case that they will be, if not initially, because obviously we understand this is a new body, but it is the one which seems to be the yes, I'm going to say the delivery arm, which has the eyes of the government and will be the route through which the funding is channeled. Are they not? I mean, they will have responsibility, strategic responsibility, for example, for transport. Does that not go as far ultimately, if not immediately, but in the time period that we're talking about, let's say the 2030s and the 2040s, responsible for actually delivering things like, let's say, for example, a dual carriageway between Derby and Ashbourne?
In the short term, they are responsible for improving access to regional infrastructure. In the medium term, that will, I expect you're right, they will get increasing amount of responsibility. But highways will still, Ministry of Transport is still responsible for major highways development. So the funding that MCA has provided for highways at the moment is about small-scale developments, the sort of thing that the county council would do, and nothing much more than that. So yes, it will probably. I expect that it will grow through time, but your guess is as good as mine in how long that will take.
I think, Roger, I took a slightly more positive readout from the meeting, which essentially was that if that were an option which the council chose to go with, MCA would look to facilitate a partnership to help guarantee delivery not just of houses but of the required infrastructure. Councillor Burfoot, Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, my two questions was identical to Lucy Peacock's and Roger Shelley's, but in terms of the need for infrastructure provision, we have this dilemma, don't we, all the time, really, in terms of cumulative development, one development after another in the same area, and at what stage do Severn Trent or Highway Authority or local the lead local flood authority actually come up with a cumulative impact assessment of certain areas. I mean, there's no guarantee that housing sites and business sites that are allocated are going to come forward at any particular time. If you think about Corder Quarry in Matlock, for instance, how long has that been either talked about and proposed, various proposals from different developers, and we still haven't got there. We've only done a very small proportion of what the development that's actually in the local plan. There's been several, probably like last 2 or 3 local plans, in fact. We're not really making progress, so that is an example. And of course, we've got so many other derelict sites in quarry sites, particularly, which are very challenging to develop. And in terms of the infrastructure they require, it's quite enormous, really, in terms of particularly highways and drainage and so on. So I just wonder how we can have a local plan or devise a local plan that's going to take all those sorts of things on board during the plan period and make sure that the infrastructure is actually provided as opposed to being proposed and then perhaps forgotten about or not implemented by the likes of Severn Trent or the Environment Agency or whoever.
Councillor Brewer put that, that question has been asked many, many times, as you know. And I think it gets the nub of what Mrs. Rains is saying. As Councillor Hughes has said, we are not the delivery agency for any of those major pieces of infrastructure. We have to work with those agencies to understand what their position is on infrastructure as it stands at the moment, and also to work with them to help identify what is likely to emerge through the local plan process so that they can plan for it. But at the end of the day, we cannot deliver that, and we are beholden on them to deliver it, taking account of all the information that we provide to them. But clearly, if there are some major and significant constraints that the infrastructure delivery plan identifies, and the work we do on the SLAR identifies, and the work the development options identifies, then those will have an impact upon our thinking in terms of the potential allocation of sites within the local plan. But if we have the indication from those agencies that there are no significant constraints, that's the advice that we will give you, and it's the advice that we've given to you in the past about infrastructure and the impact that it has. All we can do is be able to sort of signpost you to saying and to the inspector that we understand what the infrastructure constraints are and how they're likely to be dealt with as part of the delivery of sites going forward.
Thank you. Any further questions? Peter, Councillor Dobbs.
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up on this theme, to what extent is the local plan at risk when examined if we don't have any firm commitment on infrastructure? Looking back to the 2017 plan, for example, it references foul sewage capacity for the north of Ashbourne and the five-way junction. As far as I'm aware, neither have changed since 2017. And yet there is planning approval for circa 400 homes with the same sewer line.
The onus will be on us as a planning authority to be able to demonstrate to the inspector at the examination that we understand the aspirations and expectations, not the expectations, but the aspirations and the approach that the agencies are likely to take in relation to the delivery infrastructure to go alongside the new development. And that really is effectively where we need to be as a planning authority. If there are any major pieces of infrastructure that need to be put in place prior to development, and that can be a whole range of things, and they are big, significant constraints that need to be addressed prior to development going in place, that will come through the infrastructure delivery plan, and then we'll have to make sure that the development is phased accordingly. But in terms of the approach that's been taken so far and the approach that we've found successful with the examination process is being able to identify and signpost that we understand what those constraints are, how the agencies are likely to deliver them, and how that's likely to impact upon the development.
Thank you. And just come back. I mean, to what extent can, for example, Severn Trent, they seem to get a lot of flack in this respect, say, well, you didn't tell us, this wasn't firm, you know, this was just a twinkle in your eye, and so we haven't done anything because we don't know it's going to be cost effective for our shareholders?
That's a good question, and you know, the engagement with, and I've said this at previous meetings, the engagement we have now with Severn Trent is much better than it was previously. They are much more involved in responding to the comments, not comments, but the sites that we've had identified to us through the SLAR process. And I would hope that they are very clear and understand the strategy that we're going to be bringing forward, because they will be part of the consultation process in terms of the development of the infrastructure delivery plan. They will be part of the consultation that we do on the draft plan. They'll be part of the consultation that we do on the plan that we envisage we're going to submit to the Secretary of State. So they should be engaged in that process all the way throughout. What we can do is we can use the phrase, we can, you know, lead the horse, but we can't make it drink. That's where we end up being, unfortunately. We can tell them, signpost them, but we can't actually get them to the point necessarily and force them to do what they don't. They will deliver, unfortunately, they will deliver their upgrades, improvements to infrastructure at a point when they think it's appropriate to do so.
Okay.
Yeah.
One of the issues is that they don't really understand how much of the volume of liquids going through their infrastructure, particularly the sewage capacity of their infrastructure, the sewage volumes. And I mean, Councillor Linthwaite has been having conversations with Severn Trent about particular flooding incidents, and they've said, well, there is sufficient capacity in the sewer for all the housing and other properties on that branch of the sewer. But they know that their sewer is overflowing. So and they've come back and said, well, it's probably because of unauthorised use of connections to their sewers. So people connect land drains to their sewers because that's the easiest way to get rid of surface water on their sites. But they don't tell Severn Trent about it, and the consequence of that is that Severn Trent is actually having to manage more fluid than it has planned for, and as a result, if new development goes on, it then overloads the sewer. So, I mean, Councillor Linthwaite is arranging a meeting between Severn Trent and various other bodies associated with issues in Matlock to try and understand, to help them understand what the issues are and what they can do about it. But so it's a real ongoing problem, and it's one that Severn Trent now seems to be recognising, certainly as far as Matlock and Tansey is concerned.
I think all members received an invitation from Severn Trent to a presentation from them on some aspects of their future investment programme. So, you know, if a number of colleagues are able to get to that, you can put these questions direct to Severn Trent and see what answer you get from the horse. Right, we don't have any recommendations associated with this item, but I hope you found it. I hope you found it useful. I certainly think the discussion afterwards has been useful, and we will ensure that the presentation is circulated to all members, and we will have it attached to the minutes of the meeting. If we move on to item 7, this is where we're looking at the first draft of our vision and strategic objectives for the new plan, and these have been looked at in detail by our officers to reflect the changing aspirations and priorities of the new council, as well as the change in circumstances since the original plan, our current plan in 2017. Nicky Bartley is going to introduce this briefly, and then again it would be useful to have questions from members and then a debate. So, Nicky, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Every local plan requires a positive vision for the future of the plan area and a set of strategic objectives for how that vision is to be realised. The report before you sets out the suggested changes to the adopted spatial vision and strategic objectives that the review of the local plan will be based on moving forwards. The proposed changes take account of both changes at a national and a local level since the current local plan was adopted, including changes in legislation and guidance, so the new MPPF, the council plan, input from local plan subcommittee as it was last summer, and new local plan evidence that's being prepared. Changes to the spatial vision are summarised at paragraph 2.5 of the report and set out in detail at appendix 1. And they now include reference to thriving and sustainable communities in line with the corporate plan, supporting the transition to net zero and addressing climate change, including requirements for high quality design, meeting housing needs and ensuring that new development is supported by new and improved infrastructure. The vision is supported by some proposed changes to the strategic objectives, and these are summarised at paragraph 2.6 and set out in detail at appendix 2. And these include issues around a greater emphasis on all areas of the natural environment and not just green infrastructure, requirements that new development is adaptable and resource efficient as well as in keeping with its surroundings, new objectives on water resources, a greater emphasis on safe and accessible places to play and healthy lifestyles, looking at retrofitting renewable energy technologies in new development, and also infrastructure around electric vehicle charging and sustainable transport. Once agreed, the vision and the strategic objectives will form the foundation of the local plan review, and as you'll see, recommendation 1 seeks endorsement for those changes put before you tonight. However, we recognise that given that we have a lot of work still to do on the local plan, that we may need to make additional changes moving forward, and any such changes as the local plan progresses will be brought back to you and this committee for further consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicky. I know that Councillor Hughes has a suggested addition to the vision and the objectives, but we'll come to that as we start the debate. But I'd like to take questions from members first on particularly the detail of the appendix here. Councillor Shelley.
Thank you, Chair. It's not so much a question about the detail. I actually approve of everything that's in here. It's a tightening up of the existing local plan. It follows a lot of the objectives and the priorities that the Progressive Alliance has put forward. I'm particularly keen to see the references to the need to creatively and imaginatively explore how we can make robust those open spaces in the A6 and Darley-Dale corridor. So very, very pleased to see all of that. I suppose my concern really is how valuable this will be in the face of the rhetoric and the pressure that we're likely to get, maybe not just from this government, but from future governments, when they refer to things like, I think the phrase last week was build, baby, build. Do you see some contradiction there? Do you think we're going to go head to head with them over this kind of extra detail?
I think there obviously is a challenge for us. Our housing numbers have increased significantly, as we've discussed at this meeting before, and there is significant challenges as to whether we can meet that. And, you know, we will have to take a view once we've done that work that Mike's outlined on capacity as to how far away we potentially are or how close we are to those requirements that the government have set us, taking account of, you know, the national park part of it as well. If we are a long way away, we obviously do have to look about whether there's anything else we can do to try and get closer to that in a way that we don't feel compromises too many issues, and that's part of the work, as Mike outlined earlier, that Arcadis are doing for us in terms of development options. So that will start to look at those implications of different development strategies. And, you know, but there will be some, I think, difficult decisions for us to make in terms of how far we can go sustainably to meet those numbers, and how far that meets the government's agenda for, you know, for growth that they are putting forward. I think Mike will probably come on to it on the next item, but we have got the option of taking advice from people like the Planning Advisory Service, from the Planning Inspectorate themselves, in terms of how risky an approach is to go in at a lower or not ambitious enough number from a government agenda point of view, but something that we may feel is locally the right thing to do. But we're not quite at that point in terms of knowing what that kind of any gap, if there is a gap to capacity, might be. But it's certainly something that we're very aware of.
I think the first challenge is actually for our officers to be able to respond positively to the objectives which members have set them, and I personally think that they've responded very positively, and I think the reframing of the objectives, I think as you've said, Roger, I think that is something which I hope everyone can endorse. And personally, I think this does provide a very strong framework for delivering a plan which can meet those challenges, but it meets all the challenges of our green challenges, our infrastructure challenges, and our sustainable community challenges. I think we can triangulate them in a way which hopefully all parties will be satisfied. But that's obviously the ultimate test of the plan. Councillor Burfoot Martin, you were next.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My question really is relating to, or ongoing from Councillor Shelley's in a way, but focusing more on design. We talked, in fact, we were told about design code and work being done on that earlier in an earlier slide. But I think it's implementing that's the problem. I mean, if you look back to when the present local plan was identified and approved in 2017, if you think of all the developments that have been constructed since then, there's so many examples of bad design, to be honest, and particularly materials. That's what always concerns myself and Sue as a member of the planning committee. And so many developments, well, we've probably in the past, Sue and others have opposed developments on the basis of the materials that are put forward. But it never seems to be a reason for refusal. It's always something to be negotiated later, or they're going to have a colour palette of the brickwork or whatever it is. And then that doesn't seem to materialise. So we've got some strange developments on Chesterfield Road, for instance, below the golf club, where we've got brick and stone on different elevations of the same building. And whichever way you look at them, it doesn't seem very satisfactory, because the brick is red and the stone is obviously buff. And of course we've got also other developments in Matlock particularly, and I know Ashbourne's different because it's red brick is more typical of that area, but it's never been typical of Matlock, although a previous development manager thought it was. But I think we always had disagreement with him about that. But how do we ensure that these details, if you like, are going to be implemented? We were on holiday a few weeks ago in East Yorkshire, and we called this a holiday village on the old Butlins holiday campsite, where all those buildings have been demolished and a new holiday village is being constructed. And that would be a fantastic example of best practice in terms of the materials and the layout of the properties. So they're mainly obviously fairly small dwellings, well, mixed size I suppose, but they work on top of what you might call affordable dwellings if they'd been in the private sector and not a holiday development. But then the design and the layout was absolutely so impressive. It ought to be heralded as a superb example of good design up and down the country. But there are so few examples of that. Wherever you go, you see red brick houses around all town and village bypasses, for instance, all filled in with red brick houses. I can't understand why planners are always keen on or willing to approve developments in a totally inappropriate colour. And obviously we're heralding Derbyshire Dales as an example of conservation and landscape, and so high quality landscape, and yet we're approving these dreadful developments. And the other good example, of course, is at Middleton, on the way up to Middleton Top. That was a very good development. That needs to be replicated elsewhere as well.
Yeah, that's one of the ones we looked at the design training session, wasn't it? Yeah, and we had a good look at how good the frontage was. I think we all had a few queries about how it worked when we got around the back. But yes, it was one of those. I think it's a challenge recognised not just locally but nationally in terms of however good your design policy is and how locally specific it is very difficult to always deliver that on site when developers on sites may change, amendments are made at very different stages of the planning process. I think all I can say, without stealing thunder for next month's meeting, is that the design code that will come before you does start to look at different typologies around the local plan area to try and drill down to what makes those areas special, particularly around materials. So I hope that when you see that report next month and the detail that is behind it, that it will give you some comfort that those measures are starting to be built in. We obviously can go on certain allocated sites to look at more master planning and design code approaches for individual sites as well when we get to that process. But in terms of the local plan area wide design code, it does start to dig into that detail and hopefully will give you some comfort. And we also want to give weight to that design code by including it in the local plan when we go to examination. So it's part of the decision-making process at the highest level. It's not a piece of guidance that, can be argued how much weight is given to it in the decision-making process. It will be part of the plan.
I would urge members to, if you find time, have a look at some settlements which have been developed with a strong design code. Go down to Poundbury, go up to Allerton Bywater near Leeds, and then you can see actually you do get very positive results where you have a strong design code and you have a local authority who's prepared to back it. Matt, Councillor Buckler.
Yeah, I've got two questions, if that's okay. The first one relates to items 7 and 8, and will seem a bit strange. But I've said about it before. So point 10 of the report talks about the climate change implications of the climate change implications which arise from the report. There's nothing in there about the biodiversity implications which arise from the report, which is one of the things it's been raised at previous meetings, and I recognise that I bang on about it all the time, and I'm going to continue banging on about it all the time, because one of the things that we said in our nature plan, Objective 2 of our nature plan, is that by 2027 the Council will have revised local plan policies on nature conservation and enhancement. Objective 1 of the plan is that biodiversity duty will become embedded into Council policies and practices, and the Council will become leaders in championing nature conservation and enhancement. Now, we've raised the fact that biodiversity implications need to be considered in the local plan report. The local plan is so significant in terms of nature conservation and enhancement, and I'm really pleased to see some of the changes that have been made in the strategic objectives, but it's not explicitly said about it hasn't been explicitly said about in any of the local plan reports that I've seen, which suggests that it hasn't been embedded, which is one of the considerations that we've all approved as a council we want to see. So the specific question around this was around SO2, because it doesn't make sense to me
because it says to maintain, enhance and conserve the area's distinct landscape characteristics, biodiversity net gain and cultural and historical heritage assets. How are we going to maintain, enhance and conserve biodiversity net gain? That should be, the net gain in that suggests that that's been added in because somebody's done a search on biodiversity and that said don't put biodiversity net gain. It shouldn't say that, it should say biodiversity. So, if we're going to embed it, it'd be really good embedding it and thinking how it works. And I think it relates as well to the point that Councillor Shelley made. There isn't necessarily a conflict between nature and development. I absolutely want us to be producing appropriate local housing, enough local housing for the communities that live here. And I don't think that there needs to be a conflict. But the only way there's not going to be a conflict is if it's properly embedded in consideration and planned. And at the moment, it feels like it's added on. And so, making sure that in our reports we show what the biodiversity, what the implications are of even if you say there are no implications on biodiversity, there can be a question about how you can show that. At the moment, all it says is that there has been no consideration of biodiversity because there's nothing in the report which says that you considered it.
I think we'll come back to the substance of that in debate, Matt. But never be afraid of banging on. A number of us do about a number of subjects, so don't worry about that. But Nikki or Matt, do you want to? Nikki or Mike, do you want to respond to the question?
If I cover SO2, it was longer, felt too long and got trimmed, if I'm honest with you. And having read it again, sitting here, I think we do need to have a look at how that wording works, because you're right, it doesn't sit comfortably with the kind of adjectives that's used. So we will take that away and have another look at how that's worded. It was obviously never meant to be an add-in. As I said, it started as the amendment started as something that got a bit longer than maybe they should have done, and we were obviously trying to be expedient with it. So, but happy to have another look at that. I don't know if Mike wants to come back on the biodiversity implications generally in reporting.
Yeah, I think, I hear what Councillor Buckler said. It's, you have made that comment and those comments consistently, and this is essentially our first draft and first go at looking at trying to address not just the changes that have been suggested need to be made that come out of national policy, but also come out of the council's corporate plan and also the nature plan. There are other elements within the local plan which we haven't yet considered at this committee around biodiversity net gain. And as I said in my presentation, we are about to commission some consultants to look at whether or not there's justification to encouraging development to go beyond the statutory 10%. So I understand where you're coming from, but what I would try and say to you is please be assured that it's not forgotten and it will be embedded within the plan. And clearly, there will be opportunities for you to debate and discuss with us. And as Nikki said, to look at the wording in detail and help shape that wording in detail. And that's the reason why we're bringing this report to you tonight.
David, Councillor Chapman.
Thanks, Peter. I think I'm sort of coming in on a similar path to Matt, but mine concerns SO1 on Appendix 2, and that wonderful catch-all natural capital. Now, natural capital, I would expect to be more closely defined. I mean, quarrying is natural capital, so do we protect and enhance the quarries? You can even argue that fracking is natural capital. Seeing a primrose at the side of the roadside is natural capital. So it's not necessarily an enhancement, just natural capital alone, because we could apply natural capital. You could apply natural capital to a desolate moorland, for example. But having said that, on the other side, there are instances of natural capital that would not be particularly beneficial. So I wonder if we could give it a bit closer definition.
Happy to have a look at that.
Any further questions, Lucy?
Well, is it a question? I mean, I've got a list of typos and suggestions for changes. Do you want to? Does this come in this section, or is that a debate thing? That's my question.
I think, Councillor Peacock, if you've got some suggestions, typos, then rather than necessarily running through them in the chamber, then if you want to send those through to us, and we can have.
Oh, okay. So I will do.
Best if there's something
I will do that with the
fundamental.
typos. I've also got some general comments on. There's a few changes that you're not necessarily going to agree to. So I'll discuss those in a minute, but I'll just send you the typos. Okay.
Right, we're going to move into the debate. Could I just take the feeling of the meeting before we do that to make this bit of the process easier? Does anyone have any fundamental problems with the vision and objectives as presented? Is there anything fundamental there that people are going to raise objections to? No, thank you for that. I know Councillor Hughes, David has got a suggestion to reinforce the objectives along the lines which a couple of you have mentioned, in fact. What I suggest we do, and taking the point that Councillor Peacock has made, we want to give all members the opportunity to suggest some tweaks, amendments, enhancement, reinforcement of, if you like, the wording in the text we've got here, and our officers are quite happy to receive that by the end of next week, if that is possible, because we know the timetable they're working to, so the process can't go on forever. So if members do have suggestions as to how the text could be better worded to make it clearer, or I's and T's, if you like, then please send those into to Nikki. Is it to you directly?
It can either come to Mike, myself, or through the planning policy email address. We'll get it.
Feel free to do that rather than, if you like, go through that in the debate. I don't think we need to do that, because it's open to all members to put those proposals forward. But I'm going to ask David to introduce his suggestions as to how we could reinforce the objectives, and then we'll take hopefully a proposal to accept the recommendations as in the report. David.
Thank you. I think the issue is really green spaces, and green spaces are important to Derbyshire Dales for a variety of reasons. First of all, biodiversity is of primary importance, but secondly, the visitor economy is reliant on green spaces, and while they're protected in the national park, there is no protection on green spaces outside the national park. Yet there is a significant visitor economy outside the national park, and it is reliant on the fact that Derbyshire Dales everywhere is a green and pleasant land. Peter and I have been discussing this, and also the issue of the policy associated with the Derwent Valley corridor, or the space between Darley Dale and Matlock, which was supposed to have been protected in the last local plan, but has been eaten away and is really not able to be protected anymore. So, and the idea that came out, and it's not my idea, it's person on my left here, is to establish a series of green corridors around across Derbyshire Dales, and these green corridors would. This is different from looking at individual sites. These are areas where a policy would apply to the whole area rather than just to individual sites. Applying a biodiversity policy to an individual or ecological policy to any individual site might protect that site, but it does nothing for the area around it, and it doesn't provide a corridor for the movement of wildlife and so on, and it doesn't support the continuation of the visitor economy. So we've had some ideas about where these green spaces these green corridors may exist, but that I think is for a future meeting. What I would like to propose is that we include the establishment of green corridors in this particular plan, in the spatial vision or objectives, and so that we can then build on those in terms of policy later. And yeah, I think that's probably all I want to say at this stage. The reason for doing it is then in terms of the ecology of Derbyshire Dales, and in terms of maintaining our visitor economy. Okay.
Anybody want to put any questions to David on that? Matt, you're first.
Yeah, so the first thing to say about that is to do with the local nature recovery strategy, which is due to be signed off by the county council this week, I believe, which should provide a framework for some of that. And it will be really good to see. It would be good to see what's happening in terms of the local nature recovery strategy, again embedded in the objectives, the stuff which is in the local plan, because there's been a lot of work being done on the local nature recovery strategy by a lot of people, and that would have county council and probably MCA support as well. So it'd be really good to see that, there probably is a mechanism to do some of that through the local nature recovery strategy. The last thing was it's always weird that we talk about building on these green policies that we're putting in place. So yeah, that's the question. It'd be really good to make sure that it's included, the local nature recovery strategy is aligned with it.
Lucy.
It was just a more general question, really. So it sounds good, but it's the first I've heard of it, and do we have any reason to think that might that affect the timescale the very tight timescale that we're already working for, or are there any reasons not to do this? Is what I'm asking really to Mike.
So I think the principle of green corridors is one that, as officers, we would accept that there are significant benefits to, and the ecological side of it, the biodiversity side of it is one key aspect of it. The impact on landscape quality side of things is another side of it. The benefits for the visitor economy are another side of it that have positives. On the converse to that, the one issue that I have as your officer sort of advising you is to what extent are you thinking about where those might sit, where those might run, and who ultimately would be responsible for the deliverability of those particular features. And that is where I would have a little bit of anxiety about in some respect, because one of the things that we would need to do as part of the preparation of the plan is ensure that the plan is deliverable, and we would need to understand what agencies would be involved, as we would with any element of infrastructure, in the delivery of those green infrastructure, those green corridors, which is ultimately part of our green infrastructure for the district. So, we can take that away as a proposal and give it some thought, but those are some of the caveats that immediately come to mind that we would need to make sure that they're deliverable, and that also they don't necessarily have an impact upon viability for development. We can have a look at it, but as Councillor Peacock says, you know, there may well be implications in terms of timescales for us to do that.
I think that's a fair point, Mike, and I think we would all accept that. Before I come on to Councillor Shelley, I think the advantage, I think, certainly from my perspective, is that we have some quite general ecological policies, green policies, but they're very non-specific in terms of where they apply. So this is an attempt to address that issue and where we are going to focus, where it's really important to focus minds and investment and how we accommodate development in order to bring about the objectives, our broad greener objectives that we're seeking to achieve. So that's the thinking behind that. But we take Mike Casey's point that it has to be a pragmatic and practical approach. Roger, Councillor Shelley.
Yes, thank you. I mean, I think it's a terrific idea in principle, and I'm pretty sure it would be backed by large numbers of residents in my neck of the woods and elsewhere where we've got this inevitable tension where there is such a large housing pressure to extend and link up what never started out as urban communities, but which were initially a succession of small settlements and villages and have lost their character to some extent because of the infilling that's happened. So I know there will be a lot of support out there for this kind of thrust. My question really is, have we got examples of where it has been delivered successfully elsewhere?
I haven't got any examples at this stage.
Councillor Shelley, as I said before, you know, we're quite happy to look at and examine this proposal. Presumably Nicky would have had some experience from elsewhere of green corridors from working at the City Council. But we will need to have some time and resources to be able to do that, and to be able to then identify where strategically they may fit in terms of the overall strategy for the plan and location-wise.
I think, colleagues, certainly if you look at the approach by Sheffield City Council on their planning, that is the greenest city in England, and their approach to local planning is predicated on green infrastructure and green corridors. So I think if you look at the documentation produced by Sheffield, you'll see in practice how they incorporate this sort of concept into their planning documents. Got a further question?
Yes, sorry. It was relating to. So one of the points that you've raised is around protected wildlife sites, and the national park has the vast majority of protected sites within the county. So if you look at the South Derbyshire, for example, it's less than 2% of the district is protected through SSSIs, whereas in the Peak District, it's a significant proportion of the site is and so actually in terms of the visitor economy, there are it's one of the conversations that we have at the national park is around whether sustainable tourism is sustainable within the national park, because the infrastructure, they can't build the infrastructure to get people there. You can't build the infrastructure to keep people there. So actually there are really good opportunities within Derbyshire Dales to enhance the visitor economy, bring people into Derbyshire Dales, and for that to stay, for people to be going, for the visitor economy to be bigger than the national park, because actually the national park isn't necessarily sustainable as a sustainable tourism venue. So there are significant opportunities around the World Heritage Site and keeping people in the Derwent where there's much better access, and recognising that. But there isn't the level of statutory protection that there is within. So if what we want to do is to get people to come and access high quality nature spaces in the Derbyshire Dales, we're going to have to make them, because they're not there to the same level that they are to the same extent that they are in the national park. So I think that helping to create the nature economy within Derbyshire Dales is going to require something like the proposal that you've got here. And I think one of the other things that we've talked about, one of the things that I talked about in the Peak District was around delivering multiple benefits. So there are really good opportunities. The Derwent Valley is a World Heritage Site because of the water that runs through it. That's why the Industrial Revolution happened here. That water that runs through it is a serious issue if what you live is in one of the communities which is alongside it because of flooding. So there are natural flood management opportunities throughout the whole catchment, which can reduce. If you make those areas for natural flood management, which are accessible, you get those benefits in terms of natural flood management. You get those benefits in terms of access to high quality green spaces. And that's the point about embedding this stuff in the local plan. If we look at where there are really good natural flood management opportunities, if you could reconnect the river with the floodplain between Grindleford, between Roseley and Matlock, you may well be able to reduce the risk of flooding in Matlock and provide green spaces where people can access. But you don't want to be building houses on it. That is going to be a really bad idea.
Right, we've got two recommendations here before us on page 11. And we've agreed that if members want to submit suggested more minor changes to the text, please do that to Nikki or Mike by the end of next week. But with the addition of Councillor Hughes's proposal around embedding, if you like, what I call the notion of a green corridor strategy within the objectives, do we have anyone who would like to move we accept recommendation 1? Councillor Peacock.
Can we? So I'd be happy to move that with the proviso that this is, this is subject to officer appraisal. But can we also incorporate the suggestion that Matt made earlier about making doubly sure that biodiversity is embedded in it? I don't mind how you word that.
Were you happy with that, Nikki? Yes, that's. Would anyone like to second that proposal from Lucy? Councillor Buckler.
Yeah, I'd like to second that. Thanks.
Check, that's it.
Yes. Any contributions? Councillor Hughes, David first.
I also suggest that we include Matt's reference to the work that Derbyshire County Council has done on. Could you repeat what it was?
LNRS.
Yeah.
Right, LNRS. Yeah.
Okay.
Make sure we make reference to the LNRS.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Any further contributions? Yes, Councillor Burfoot Martin.
Is Councillor Hughes's or David Hughes's proposed amendment, is that included in what we've just approved, or if not? Oh, it is, right, very good, that's all right. I was going to second it otherwise. Right, thank you.
Right, so we have a slight amendment to recommendation 1, which, if I could try and summarise, then incorporates an additional objective relating to the incorporation of green corridors within the plan, with a caveat in brackets subject to a feasibility assessment by our officer colleagues. That we reinforce references, we embed references to biodiversity as a strategic objective in the plan. And something else which escapes me, which I've forgotten. And that we make specific reference to the local nature strategy in our objectives.
Before we go on, because we're in debate again on that on that particular motion. There's reference to aged population in the report, and my feeling is that we can't just, it's discriminatory just to consider one group and not other groups. And there are, and I didn't know whether to bring this up now, but I think I will. So there's the aging population, there's children, and there are young people, there are families, and there are single people, and it's difficult to and there are disabled people, and they overlap. And I've done this. I've had this problem in other areas, in other work that I've done, and how you refer to the variety of different groups. If you refer to one, does it mean you're focusing your whole plan on that one group? If you don't, so I think we need some sort of catch-all which says, irrespective of that, we want to have some we want to make sure that we're providing a plan which is suitable for the ageing population and possibly children and the disabled. I don't know, but it's just I worry about just having the aged population in here and nobody else.
Chair, if I can reassure Councillor Hughes that, one of the elements that we have to go through to make sure the plan is compliant with legislation is to ensure that we go through an equalities impact assessment.
Yeah.
Our equalities officer is looking at the plan and will look at these, but I think the point that you make around making sure that we address all elements of the community is an important one, and we'll try and reflect upon that in terms of that particular aspect of the vision.
I suggest, David, if you want to make that point. In defence of our officers, I think these objectives are derived also from the issues which have identified as part of the evidence base, and one of the key issues is that we do have an ageing population, and therefore it is incumbent on the plan to make sure that we meet the needs of that specific group. That's not ignoring the needs of other sectors of the community, but it appears to be, and the evidence suggests that we do have a very specific problem's not the right word, but we do have the situation where we have an ageing population, as some of us can testify, and as I said, the plan needs to address that, which is why I think the text is written as it is. It's not to exclude other sections of the community. But David, if you can provide something, that would be helpful. Right, we've got a revised proposal, which I think I hope reflects the views of all members of the committee, and I hope will be endorsed by the council. Can we have all those in favour to please show? And that's unanimous. Thank you, colleagues. We've got a second recommendation, which I hope we can more or less take as read, which is that as the plan progresses, there will necessarily be hopefully some more minor changes to the vision and objectives, and they will come back to the committee again for consideration. Would someone like to move recommendation 2? Councillor Buckler, seconded Councillor Burfoot. Anyone want to speak on that? No. All those in favour? Thank you, colleagues. That's carried unanimously. Does anyone want a break before we move on to the final item? Like 5 minutes? Or do you want to carry on? Yeah, we'll adjourn for a quick refreshment break. The meeting now and move on to agenda item 8. This is where we're looking at the report from the Planning Advisory Service, who came to support and interact with our officers earlier this year. They came to look at the processes and procedures associated with our local plan review, and they presented here to us a very full diagnostic of the process as they see it, and then we have the action plan which has been prepared by our officers in response to the report from the Planning Advisory Service. So I'm going to ask Mike not to go through the detail of the report, because I hope you've all had the chance to read it, but just to outline the principles, and then we'll move very swiftly on to questions from colleagues. So, Mike, over to you.
Chair, thank you. As Councillor O'Brien has said, the Planning Advisory Service contacted us after we had submitted the updated local development scheme in March of this year. And as it says in the report, all local planning authorities were required to update their local development schemes to ensure that the government understood what direction of travel they were going in relation to the development of their local plans, given the concerns at a national level about local plan coverages across the country waning a little bit from where it had been previously. I'm going to say it was a little bit of a bolt out of the blue when the Planning Advisory Service contacted us, but having discussed it with them, it's very clear that the government were looking at local authorities like ourselves, where we were looking to submit our local plan in the back end of next year, very much up against the deadline that they'd set for the submission of local plans under the current planning system. Officers, myself, the Principal Planning Officer Esther Lindley, engaged with consultants from the Planning Advisory Service, and the main focus was, from their perspective, as it's set out in their report, is, is the local planning authority, is Derbyshire Dales effectively set up to deliver the local plan in accordance with the local development scheme that we agreed earlier in the year, and had it got the appropriate mechanisms in place to ensure that it dealt with that in a timely manner. The report, which is in Appendix 1, provides a detailed summary of, or a detailed assessment of the sort of risks and issues that they've identified and potential mitigation measures. A number of those areas that are identified in the report are areas which we've already sought to address as a district council. So, for example, things like the programme that we brought to the previous meeting of this committee in July was much more extensive than we'd previously prepared. The risk assessment associated with that is identified within and proportionate within the local development scheme itself, so we felt that that was appropriate. Members have already agreed at council previously for us to take on board additional resources, human resources within the team. I'm pleased to say that we've managed to secure one of the 2 new posts in the last couple of days. We've got a little bit more work to do on the second post, but that's an additional level of resource that we've got available to us as a team to be able to sort of focus on ensuring that we deliver the timescales that we've set ourselves. We've tried to sort of summarise some of the sort of key points that we think needed to be addressed and where they need to be addressed in Appendix 2, based upon the sort of summary of the issues. Just to highlight things like we've now set up an advisory meeting with the Planning Inspectorate. That's going to take place on the 21st of October, and then Inspector will come to Matlock to discuss with us particular issues around the areas that might be of concern to us as a district council and as a planning authority. Mrs. Rains mentioned the point about have we robustly considered our evidence base for the local plan process. And one of the bits of kit we have in our locker to address that is the Planning Advisory Service Toolkit. It's something that's been around for a number of years, and we used previously when we submitted the adopted local plan. And essentially what that does is go through lots and lots of different parts of the statutory requirements, the evidence base, and how we have sought to address them relative to things like the National Planning Policy Framework and the Planning Practice Guidance. That's something that will be developed and worked upon over the course of the next 15 months or so, and it will be something that we will need to submit with the plan when we submit it to the Secretary of State at the back end of next year, and that will then be used by the inspector appointed to undertake the examination of the plan to say, have you addressed areas like robust evidence? Have you addressed the duty to cooperate? Have you done the appropriate statement to common grounds? Have you done the right level of consultation? Has your consultation been undertaken in compliance with the statement to community environment? All of those, statement to community involvement, all of those will feature in that response and the past toolkit. There was an issue that that was touched upon in terms of levels of member engagement, which is clearly a positive, but one of the things that was raised in the discussion we had with PAS is that also can have a negative impact in terms of the timescales. But the re-establishment of the local plan committee as it is now, and the regular sessions that we've now got set up with the chair and vice chair, allow us as officers to be able to sort of have those engagement and dialogue with them around progress on the plan, in addition to the regular meetings we have within our own team as well. The final point really in terms of the action plan is around dealing with the representations, and yes, we anticipate a large number of representations coming forward, particularly in areas where development might be suggested that development isn't necessarily wanted. We need to be able to assess those representations in a pretty effective and efficient way, and we are looking to try and utilise AI to try and sort of summarise the responses that we receive, so that actually when we come to responding to them, we've actually got that work done for us, and we're literally just sort of responding to the individual responses in a summarised way, rather than having to go through as we have in the past.
thousands and thousands of representations on a line-by-line basis. So we can use AI to our benefit. That's going to speed up how we deal with that process. I think, finally, in summary, really, I think what I'm hoping that I can do tonight is reassure members that whilst there are and have been concerns by the Planning Advisory Service, those concerns have, over the course of the last couple of months, we've sought to address those and put in place measures to reassure not only you but also the Planning Advisory Service that we are on track to deliver the plan and submit the plan to Secretary of State by the end of next year.
Thank you, Mike. I'm sure there are questions from colleagues on the report and Mike's presentation. I speak too soon. Councillor Shelley.
Thank you. Yes, had a good look through this, and as I understand it, Appendix 1 is written by this external advisory team. I was just a little bit uncertain in the two columns that you get there about the issues, the risks, and the mitigation, whether it was the external body speaking or whether it was us speaking sometimes, or whether they were interpreting our answers. Okay. Because my concern, and I think you've probably addressed most of that in what you've said, is around the issue of resourcing and making sure that we do actually get this local plan through in the timely manner, but obviously addressing the concerns that we rightfully have as members. So I was a bit concerned when I saw the references to what appeared to be, I'm not ashamed of criticism if we are perceived to be slowing down the process, but part of that, the other side of that coin, is because we're hopefully doing our job properly. So there is that balance, which I didn't think necessarily the report fully or fairly represented. My bigger concern is when I see references like not clear how much further evidence needed and unclear if officers maintain an evidence-based tracker. So I'm seeking reassurance, I think, from you that those things are well in hand. And if we do have doubts, because none of us want to be sitting round here after we've been working at this for about 3 years to feel that our efforts have gone to waste. I don't just mean from a vanity point of view of the councillors, but everybody and all the stakeholders who have contributed from outside as well. That if there is that slightest whiff of a suggestion that we don't have the resources in-house, and we do struggle sometimes to recruit to posts for all the reasons we know, that we are using that possibility of buying in people from outside, as other parts of this authority have done, in order to carry out that work. So it's a long question.
And the simple answer, Councillor Shelley, is that members have been very, and officers have been, obviously, as we've been developing the work, conscious of the fact that we need to make sure we have got the right resources in place and the right type of resources. And there's a number of different facets to that. One is making sure we've got the right consultants on board to provide us with the evidence base. And I think we've now got to a position where we've pretty much got all of the evidence base covered by all the consultancy works we've got ongoing at the moment. The second part is also making sure that we've got the right resources within the team to manage the workloads that we've got that come out of the evidence base, and also the work we're doing on the evidence base for ourselves. So, we're doing a lot of the work on the SLA, for example, but there's also work needs to be done on revising the policies and making sure that we've got the right mechanisms in place to undertake the right consultation at the right time and those sorts of things. And members have been very keen to support us with making sure we've got the right human resources in place, and that's what we've reviewed upon. As I say, we were able to appoint somebody to one of the posts that members agreed at council earlier in the year. Yesterday, we interviewed today for another one of those posts, but unfortunately I don't think we're going to be in a position where we can accommodate or look or appoint at this point in time. So we will need to review how we address that. But if there is a need for external
assistance to help us, then we will look to buy that in and bring that in.
I think, Roger, the Vice Chair and myself share that. I think we have reiterated that point to Mike and his colleagues. So yeah, I think they fully understand the issue, and I think you made a helpful point there.
I'd just say that it may need raising higher in the authority as well, with the leadership team and the leaders of the council.
No further questions? Okay, that's good. That's not quite what I expected, but very welcome. Right, we move into debate. We have two recommendations. First is a straightforward one that we note, and second, the action plan, which I'm sure we all had a look at. That's the Appendix 2, is endorsed. Can we take them one at a time? Are we all happy to note the report? Someone prepared to move that? Councillor Burfoot, Councillor Chapman, all those in favour? Yep, that's good. Second recommendation of the action plan. This is how we address the issues raised by the Planning Advisory Service. That's in Appendix 2, that we endorse that. Would someone like to move that? Councillor Bates, Councillor Shelley. Do you want to speak on it, Anthony? Roger, do you want to speak? No. Any contributions? No. Can we have all those in favour again? No, it's unanimous. Thank you, colleagues. So that completes our business of the evening. I hope we found it helpful. I certainly found it very useful, very, very helpful and informed discussion. So thank you all for the way you've contributed to that, and thank you to our officer colleagues for the helpful way you've responded. Have a safe journey home, and we'll meet again soon.